Hi everybody, welcome back to my channel. Oh, my hair is a little frizzy today. It's been a little hard to manage. I'm speaking to you today from a very humid and cloudy day in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I wanted to talk to you a little bit about my experience applying to graduate school at Harvard and give you some advice if you're interested in applying to Harvard or any other graduate program. As some of you know from my last video, which you can find down at the link below, I applied to a master's program at Harvard Divinity School, and I did get accepted. I'm currently in Massachusetts. I begin my degree program next week, actually. When I decided to apply to Harvard, it was a little bit last minute, to be honest. I applied, I think, this past December, right in the middle of the month, and the application was due the first week of January. So I didn't really have a lot of time to construct a strong application. But I always thought about applying to Harvard since I was a little girl. I thought about going to Harvard and Oxford, and in addition to wanting to be a nun, I also wanted to go to graduate school. But it took me over a decade to finish my bachelor's degree. So by the time I graduated from my bachelor's program in September 2020, which is during the height of COVID, I really did not want to be bothered with higher education. I wasn't really sure I was ready to go back to that kind of strenuous environment that I had dealt with before. But for about a year or two prior to that, I was very engaged in the field of interfaith dialogue. I attended quite a few interfaith dialogue conferences where I met my current academic mentor at Harvard, Frank Clooney, in 2017. And I was also the assistant editor for an interreligious academic journal, which I'm still doing today. That's called the Journal of Hindu-Christian Studies. So through those experiences, I gained a lot of connections and networking in the field of religious studies and the field of theology all over the world. And a lot of the people that I met told me that I should consider getting a master's degree. So I had taken the GRE in November of last year. It was the only time I took the GRE. I did okay on it. I didn't do as well as I wanted to do, which I'm sure everybody says, but I did well enough that I thought I could use those scores to apply to graduate school. So I think I got a 161 on the verbal, a 158, I think, on quant, and I got a 6 on the writing. And I think a 6 is the highest score you can get on writing, which I've heard is pretty hard to get a 6, but writing has always been my strong suit. So I took the GRE. I did decently on it. I decided I was going to use those scores to apply to Harvard mid-December. And when I looked over the Harvard application, it didn't seem too strenuous, but it did seem time-consuming. So I only had a couple weeks really to construct a strong application before the application deadline. In the beginning of the application, there was just information about your personal address, email, where you went to college, where you went to high school, general things that you would see on a higher education application. And then after that, they wanted information about your work experience, your volunteer experience, and they wanted a resume. Now, from what I've heard, not every graduate program wants a resume. Some of them allow for a CV or prefer a CV, but in the United States, a resume is more common, and a resume allows you to be very concise and clear about what you have done in the past. So my resume was about 2 pages long. I started off with my name and then my educational experience, then my language experience, because I will need a lot of language if I decide to do a PhD program, and language is a pretty decent strength of mine as well as writing. So I wanted to include those at the forefront of my resume. After the languages, I had my work experience, research experience, some volunteer experience, and then activities that I thought were germane to the study of religion. So I did include my extensive experience with Toastmasters International and public speaking. After the resume was uploaded, we were required to have, I think, 2 or 3 recommenders to write recommendation letters for the university. I ended up including 3. I think we had the choice to include 1 professional recommendation. And I would recommend, if you're considering a degree that's more academic, to have more academic recommendations. So I chose my Sanskrit professor from the University of Pennsylvania. I chose a professor of Buddhism that I had in college, and then the editor, who's also a professor of the Journal of Hindu Christian Studies. And I decided to waive my right to view the recommendations, which I really highly recommend because it shows that you trust the recommender and that they're not biased in what they're saying to the university. Then came more of the challenging part of the application. We had to construct a personal statement about why we wanted to go to Harvard, in particular, why we wanted to study religion as a master's student, and what we hoped to gain out of that experience in our vocation or profession. And I wrote, I think, about 10 to 15 drafts of my personal statement within a span of only a couple weeks. Initially, my essay was very, very intimate, perhaps too intimate for what they may have been looking for. So my Sanskrit professor recommended that I be very clear about my educational background, that I highlight my academic strengths and my language strengths from Penn, and that I get very specific about who I want to study with at Harvard and why. So I recommend doing that. You can mention faculty members and their research in the personal statement, and if you're interviewed in the interview process, because it just shows that you're more knowledgeable about why that particular university over other universities. After the personal statement was the writing sample. And Harvard's writing sample was a little bit shorter than most other master's degree programs. I think U of Chicago required about 15 pages, Harvard about maybe like 1,200 or 1,100 words only. And this is really your chance to shine. So I included a lot of my own knowledge of Sanskrit. I actually translated some Sanskrit within my writing sample. I included a lot of research. I think my bibliography had at least 20 different sources in it. And I wrote about the type of research that I want to do when I go to Harvard. And I think that's really important to make sure that your writing sample is as particular to the area of study that you want to focus on as possible, and that you highlight your language strengths and your writing capability. Then after the writing sample, I had to submit my unofficial transcripts, and I decided to submit my official transcripts instead, because if I got accepted, they would need those anyway. So the whole process, while not very challenging, it was time consuming. I constantly revised and edited my writing sample and my personal statement again and again. And I made sure I could get those writing pieces into the hands of my recommenders, into the hands of any professor that I knew from the past. And I even let members of my family read it, even though they don't have a strong academic background. So I applied. I found out that I got accepted in March, and then came the discernment process about whether or not I actually wanted to attend Harvard. So I went to an open house, and I really discerned while I was at the open house that it was the right place for me and that I wanted to go. So that overall was my experience applying to Harvard for my master's program. If I were to give any advice to somebody applying, I would say the first piece of advice would be to get really strong recommendation letters from people that have known you for at least a year and can write about your academic readiness to engage in a master's or PhD program. Even if the college allows you to put professional recommendation letters in there, I would suggest academic, because that's the type of work that you're going to be doing when you're pursuing a master's degree. The second piece of recommendation I would give is to adhere to your passions in a way that is concise and specific. So it's very easy to write a personal statement and just have it go on and on for pages and then have trouble kind of whittling it down. Or very easy even to indicate that you're interested in the field, that you've taken a few courses in your bachelor's degree, that you read this book and that book. But I think it's important to demonstrate actual life experience and be very specific about how that experience brought you to where you are today and how you're going to tie your experience into your graduate program in order to go out into the world and pursue a career. So making those connections very, very obvious within the personal statement, your experience, how that ties into your present, your graduate studies, and then your future work is crucial, because they are ultimately looking for people that will take the degree out into the world and use it in some capacity. So that would be my second piece of advice. And my third piece of advice would be to start earlier than I did, to give yourself a lot of time to go back and read your essays again and again and again, to give them to as many people within the fields of academia as you possibly can. Even if the advice is not something you want to hear, that constructive criticism for me was crucial, I think, for getting into Harvard. I think if I had given Harvard my original personal statement that was a little bit too intimate, I may not have gotten in. So listening to your mentors, because they know the process very, very well, is a very important piece of advice that I'll give you. So I hope this was helpful for you. If you have any comments or other suggestions, feel free to put them in the chat box below. And I look forward to talking to you soon. Bye.